When students hear the word methodology, it often sounds complicated, almost like something technical. Well, that's because it is technical. But when I work with the students that I mentor, I always say to them that your methodology simply explains how you're going to conduct your research. Hello, everybody, and welcome to SA Sociology Hub. My name is Tandika Sibanyoni, and in today's session, I will be talking about your methodology chapter. A lot of people call it chapter 3. So let's get into it. Once you understand that the methodology chapter should just explain how you're going to conduct your research, then it's going to be the easiest chapter to do. After you've identified your research problem, you've reviewed your literature, and now you have to take on steps around how you will carry on your study. It's that simple, right? And this is where your methodology chapter comes in. So we have to explain what is a methodology. The methodology is it's a section of your research, normally chapter 3, which explains how your research will be conducted. And this is something that I always emphasize when I'm mentoring students, that the goal here is to get to 3 things, right? Get your reader or supervisor or whoever that's going to read your research to understand these 3 things. The first one is, what are you going to do? And the second one is, how are you going to do that? Thirdly, why have you chosen that approach? So I'm going to give you a brief philosophy class, okay? 3 things: ontology, epistemology, and methodology. The first 2 govern the last one, right? So ontology speaks to what you believe reality is, right? And an example that I can give is, do you believe that there is one objective reality that can be measured? Or do you believe that reality is shaped by people's experiences and perspectives? So this is where the founding fathers come in. There's a video I did on the founding fathers of sociology, and they speak to this, there's the objectivist reality, which is arguing that there's one objective reality, that there's one way of measuring, and so the measuring reality, and so that would be the objectivist, right? So your Auguste Comte. And then there's also the interpretivists that believe that reality is shaped by people's experiences and perspectives. So those are your interpretivist theory. Please check this video in that I've attached up here. Okay, and so because of how you believe reality to be, it governs how you collect data. So it leads us to epistemology, right? And epistemology is how we come to know a reality or that reality. In other words, how is knowledge created, right? Do you see yourself as someone that, as a researcher, or this research question that you've asked, do you believe that you should be observing, let's use a fish in a fish bowl, right? And an example is that your participants are the fish in the bowl. Do you believe that as a researcher you should be outside and not fiddle or be part of the reality that you see? As you collect data, do you think you should just observe from the outside? On the other hand, and that is the objectivist approach, that is the objectivist epistemology, right? Or do you think that you need to be inside that fish bowl to find out the reality of the fish? And so that would be the interpretivist approach. All right. And so let's look at an example. Let's look at 2 researchers, right, that want to understand why employees are motivated at work, right? And so the first researcher will take the positivist epistemology, they'll be objective. So they believe that there's an objective truth about anything, right? And so their research approach will then be like, let's just be an objective observer. And so they will treat motivation as a thing that can be quantified, right? And then there's another one, an interpretivist researcher that believes that whose ontology is that there's no single objective truth, right? And so reality is therefore motivation, like it's a social construct and it is subjective to the employees. And so how then will they conduct their, what research approach would they take? They would view themselves as part of the process, believing that they can only understand the motivation by interacting with the people, right? And so these two things then govern or lead to your methodology, right? Because the positivist approach is that there's objective truth, you're an objective observer, and you should just treat work or whatever that you're studying as or motivation as something that can be quantified. And so you believe that what you are studying should be quantified. It can be generalized to the entire population, right? So your methodology might be to create a Likert scale, do a questionnaire where you give your participants options to select from, and they don't really get to tell you the details and dive deeper into things. They're just answering based off of what you gave them. And so this methodology would be used to identify patterns, relationships, and it also governs how you analyze your data. So you'll have like a statistical trend. You look at statistics as well to see if I'm quantifying and I need to generalize to the entire population, how many people do I need to speak to be able to generalize? And what is the validity of my findings, right? On the other hand, if you choose an interpretivist approach where you're believing that this question seeks to I believe as a researcher, and from this question that I'm trying to figure out, I believe that reality is shaped by people's experiences, and you focus on understanding meaning and not measuring it, then you would conduct in-depth interviews and probing and asking people, why do you think so? And people will have to tell you, your questions would be like, can you tell me about a time when you felt deeply motivated at work? And so your goal in that moment would be to understand why and how people's experiences change or what impacts them. And someone can say, my research question doesn't, I believe that my research question should be taking on both the positivist and the objectivist and the interpretivist views. That means you would be taking on a mixed method. And that means that at some point you would do a questionnaire, and then from your findings, you will select some of the participants to probe. And so even then, how you choose, as I've said, your ontology, your epistemology, your methodology will also govern how you analyze your data. I mean, in a objectivist approach, you would have to employ statistical methods, right? Because you are measuring, you have to quantify. And that leads us into a qualitative research approach, right? And to come to your conclusions, you'd need to, for example, put on some stats On the other hand, if you're looking at people's experiences, you would be required to understand that, okay, I'm looking at experiences. I cannot quantify that. So let me look at themes. What are the themes that are coming up in my study? And so you would use a thematic analysis. And so your epistemology and your ontology govern your methodology. The class is finished. All this to say that the ontology and your epistemology shape decisions that you make about how you conduct your research. And now that we understand this section, I would like for us to look into what is usually included in a methodology chapter, right? Now that I've explained this. So you would need to choose your research approach, which would tell us whether your study is quantitative. Is it a positivist approach? It's quantitative, or it's qualitative? Is it an interpretivist approach, or is it a mixed method, right? And then you look at your research design. This should explain the overall structure of your study. For example, what is the design of your research? Are you going to look at a case study? Is this a survey? And so on and so forth. Thirdly, you look at the data collection methods. So this is how you will collect your data. For example, will you conduct interviews? Will you conduct questionnaires? Is this a focus group, or you're just observing, right? And you will need to explain what you will use as well as why. So we don't just want no, I'm doing this and this and that, and then that's it. You need to let us know why you choose to adopt that design or approach or that data collection method. Then you look at sampling. So if you remember, I spoke about how you can say, for example, if you're doing a quantitative research approach, will you be generalizing to the entire population, and therefore you would need to sample. So a sample is like a portion of the entire population, right? So not just like in South Africa, for example, if you're looking at students at universities or University of Johannesburg, you would need to know how many students are in your, maybe if you're looking at postgraduate students in the Department of, I don't know, humanities, you would need to look at the total number of students in that department and do a calculation to see how many students you would need to speak to in order for you to generalize your findings to the humanities students at the University of Johannesburg in the humanities department. And so this describes who exactly are you trying to do your research on. So who your participants are, how are you going to select them, and why are these students relevant to your study, or why is this population relevant to your study. Then you'll do your data analysis, and this explains how you will then analyze the data that you received. For example, will you be doing a statistical analysis if you're taking a quantitative approach? And if you're doing a thematic analysis, are you going to do a qualitative approach? And if you're doing a mixed method, you need to tell us where in your research will you be doing the statistical analysis, and how you will be conducting your thematic analysis. Okay, then you'll move on to the ethical considerations. This is important because not only are you just telling us, that, okay, this is my plan, you also have to tell us how you are going to be accountable to the participants, because you will need to make sure that you're not exploiting people, and so you need to make sure that they are informed of what the study is about, and they have actually given consent. They've said yes and signed that they want to be part of the study, and you need to make them aware that they can leave the research at any point in time, because the back in the days, people were exploited and abused heavily because of scientific research or just studies. And so you also need to make them aware that this research will be confidential. You won't use their names, and so you need to make sure that you're protecting them. So confidentiality and just protection of the participants is very important on a human level, but also just on a professional level, right? And so, in closing, your methodology is one of the most important parts of your research, because it shows us how your study will be conducted, right? And it brings us a clear structure, as to, okay, what should we be expecting, but also what really happened, because after you've collected your data, you need to come back to your methodology chapter and tell us, this is what I did. I know this is what I said I would do, but this is what happened at the field. And instead of this is how many people I've got to speak to, this is the method that I used, because sometimes they're like, we'll visit them and meet face to face. Then life happens. I remember for my research, I couldn't meet any of my participants because it was during COVID. And so we had to do the interviews via Zoom and Teams and all of that. So these are some of the changes that happen in your research. So you also need to just make sure that your methodology is easier to develop. So lastly, I'm currently developing a course where I guide students step by step through their research process. So from proposal to literature review, to your methodology, your analysis, and your conclusion. And if that is something that you would find helpful, keep an eye out. And if you would like us to have like a one-to-one, please do click on the link in my bio so that you can book a session. I'll also copy the link on my description. So thank you so much for your time, and please don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe, and to comment if you have any questions. I will see you in the next video. Bye.